Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. The original Metroid on the NES is far less replayable than, let's say, Mario or Zelda. About a year ago, I beat it for the very first time on the NES Classic, but if it were not for two factors, I would have never even attempted such a feat. First, I had a map. A friend of mine gifted me the Nintendo NES Classic Collector's Book that contained information on all the classics contained on the little console, including maps and tips. The map in the book included a step-by-step guide to beat the game. The second factor was the use of save states to save my progress rather than having to rely on a lengthy password system. Using the guide, I was able to complete the game in a matter of hours, as it is surprisingly not a very long game. I enjoyed the experience and probably will review it one day, but boy did it need a remake. Fortunately, Nintendo provided, and the remake stands as the definitive way to play the game today. But first, a little context. In the wake of Metroid Fusion, released in 2002, someone on the team suggested porting Super Metroid to the Game Boy Advance. But Yoshio Sakamoto, who had been part of every Metroid game development except for Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, steered the team to a Metroid remake in the style of Super. To make the game a little longer, since the original Metroid is kind of short, they added a new segment at the end of the game featuring Zero Suit Samus. The goal was also to expand on the lore of the series without adding too much to it that was new. Fleshing out Samus's backstory was a priority and is achieved in the game's opening as well as the added segment. The game was a critical and commercial success. The only real criticism for the game was leveled at its relatively short length. But that is all then. What about now? If I was limited to a single word to summarize the feel of Zero Mission, it would be hard-pressed to choose between two. Adventure would be the first, as the game exudes excitement through every fiber of its presentation, gameplay, and especially the music. The other word would be triumph. The confidence of Samus in the game that even at her weakest, she means business, and Mother Brain, Ridley, and Kraid should beware her power. I am kind of fond of watching YouTube videos at 2 times speed. I process information quickly, and I find I can get through more videos in my limited schedule this way. The reason I bring it up is because playing Zero Mission feels like playing Super Metroid set to 2x speed. It does not feel as fast as Dread, mind you, but compared to every other game that has come before, Samus strolls through the environments with a confidence unmatched in the series. But all this adventure and triumph comes at a price. Zero Mission is by far the least capable in the series at creating genuine tension until the very last act. When Samus loses her suit after the defeat of Mother Brain, she is incredibly fragile and outgunned by the space pirates until she recovers her power suit. But this feeling is short-lived, as when she does get her suit back, the space pirates literally begin to hide from her. It is at its heart a cathartic moment, but the rest of the game lacks any of this tension. It may seem unfair to compare the game to Dread in this regard, as the developers had more powerful hardware and freedom afforded to them by a new entry. It allowed them to craft an experience that couples Samus's confidence with genuine tension and suspense. That said, Fusion, which came out before Zero Mission, absolutely nails this department. Zero Mission is also very, very easy. The only real challenge it gave me was the Mother Brain fight, and that was really just me figuring out where to shoot ice beams so I can keep from getting hit and stay on top of platforms. The final boss is kind of a joke, and it was way too easy. I also do not feel the compulsion to trek back through all the areas of the game to find all the upgrades. In other games in the series, the challenge of the game was an incentive enough to go and collect more stuff. Not so here, as the final boss is so easy, I thought to myself, why bother? Now, I do not want anyone to think this means Zero Mission fails as a Metroid game. Far from it. Indeed, some claim to be the best in the series for a good reason. But it feels thematically so detached from the original Metroid that I sort of would be doing a disservice, not to mention their largely different tone and approach. I love Zero Mission for giving us an amazing and thrilling adventure to run through, Now, if I did not have the original Metroid on the NES to compare it to, I would likely have nothing to say on the matter. It's true that the game is very short, especially to seasoned Metroid fans. I'd rather list the aspect as a strength, however. Zero Mission is quick enough to be beaten by someone over the course of a short trip on our car ride. Considering it was built for a portable console, this seems appropriate. Whether you agree that the game's short length is a strength might be objective, but I would say that Zero Mission is a triumph in all other ways that matter. For example, the game replaces the punishing challenge of the original with equally challenging skill-based item collection and rewarding time saves for those who want to beat the game quickly. This means that a novice player can enjoy the game without being punished, but the skilled player can also find a lot to love here. This makes Zero Mission the most accessible and versatile game in this series to play. There is something here for everybody. The story is handled perfectly with short cutscenes that wordlessly convey the events and build excitement for each of the 3 major boss encounters. The presentation is a massive improvement over the original and might be the best sprite-based game in the series. Ridley and Kraid especially shine with their fabulous intro cutscenes and incredible sprite designs. In fact, Ridley's sprite is my favorite version of this character from the whole series. Despite the control being limited to 4 buttons and a D-pad, less than other M had, I might add, the game handles its variety of moves and power-ups with ease. Dare I say, the control department, it does more with less than even the incredible Super Metroid. The game builds to a crescendo and includes a surprise tag at the end, which is all very rewarding to play. There's no wasted effort at all, and considering the hardware the game was designed for, it's a real contender for the best game on the console. But is it the best Metroid game? Well, best is sort of subjective view, I suppose. For me, the answer is no. One day, I will rate my 2D Metroids, so I will not spoil the list here except to say it's in the top 5 for sure. There's nothing wrong with the game. Indeed, in some ways, it's mechanically superior to other games that I prefer. But the sense of tension present in other entries in the series is one of the reasons I play Metroid games. I still prefer it to the original Metroid on the NES, and if anyone asked me what the first Metroid game they should play is, I would without hesitation recommend Zero Mission. The game is fantastically designed and good fun, but it just needs some more dread, pun intended. So I had a full, complete draft of this script written about a year, maybe even 2 years ago. But after I finished the game and sat down to start recording it, I'd realized that it sucked. So I threw it all out and started all over again because this game deserves better. Because this game spawned an entire genre and might be one of the most important games of its era. This game is Super Metroid, and it deserves my very best. What is a Metroidvania? Wikipedia says, it is a subgenre of action-adventure games and/or platformers focused on guided non-linearity and utility-gated exploration and progression. These games usually feature a large interconnected map the player can explore, although parts of the world will be inaccessible to the player until they acquire special items, tools, weapons, abilities, or knowledge within the game. So in reality, a Metroidvania is a Zelda game with platforming as a focus for progression. I mean, if you remove the word platformer from the description above, you could essentially be describing A Link to the Past. Now, some people may be angry at that statement, but I think that they would miss out on the point I'm trying to make. The platforming distinction is what makes these games unique from all others in the adventure genre. Super Metroid uses platforming challenges to encourage players to grow their skill. The first time you play through in any adventure game, you are invested in the story and intrigue of that world. But after the completion of the story, what brings you back to a game? Metroidvania, Super Metroid in particular, does not say the end, it says see you next mission. It does this because it challenges you to come back, go faster, find new paths, and collect more items. This is directly facilitated by the platforming focus.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
The game begins with a voiceover. The galaxy is at peace, and the last Metroid is in captivity. One of the principal influences of Metroid is the Alien franchise. This voiceover, though shorter, is unsettling, and it calls to mind the voiceover from the second Alien film. Is the galaxy really at peace? Dropped into the space colony, an alarm sounds and Samus works her way through the facility. The doors open for her. There are no keys needed, no hindrances to her forward momentum, a detail that will be very important soon. The baby Metroid is missing, and all the scientists are dead. Did the Metroid do this? Samus presses on to find the real culprit, Ridley. This encounter is unwinnable, sort of. Either he will leave when Samus takes a certain amount of damage, or if Samus lands a certain number of shots. If the latter, Ridley will drop the baby for a second before leaving. It's a neat detail, but either way, Samus is way outmatched in this encounter. The timer pops up, and suddenly you have 1 minute to escape. The opening of Super Metroid is not a tutorial. It is an event, one of several spectacles in this game. The game really only has one cutscene at the beginning that sets up the story, but from here out, everything is conveyed to the player wordlessly through memorable moments spread out throughout the game. The way Super Metroid blends its spectacle into its gameplay is unmatched, especially for its generation. The game pushed the hardware like few other games on the console. Everyone who plays this game has a favorite moment, a scene that just blew them away. The game masterfully draws the player in, building up those moments and then paying them off in spectacular fashion. Samus lands on the planet, and the rain is pounding down on her ship and the suit. As the player moves under the protection of the overhanging caves and the caverns below, the sound of the thunder persists. Enemies have varied sounds that they make when killed, and beams thud and missiles crash. The music transitions from area to area, and the player can tell easily where they are at any moment based solely on the soundtrack. The tracks are iconic, and Kenji Yamamoto's use of drums, bass, and atmospheric metallic sounds really brings the game to life. The game is as successful as it is, at least in part, due to the music and how incredible it is. Moving down the only pathway available to the player, bug-like creatures fluttering away, you get the sense that these tunnels have not been used in some time. You come to a shaft with multiple doors going off to the left and to right. One is completely inaccessible as Samus is too large, but a second to the left further down can be opened using her beam. Once inside, though, progression is blocked by another space that's too small. A red door across on the right is unopenable with Samus's beam, and Samus can only progress through the door at the bottom of the shaft. In the colony, doors were open to you, but here doors are locked, and you are going to need keys. In this one room, you are shown 3 keys. One that you have, the blue doors, open with your beam. The second will be the morph ball, and the third, missiles. Super Metroid is full of these gates and corresponding keys. It swaps traditional keys of a Zelda game for power-ups. Some of these locked doors are obvious. Others have subtle hints that can be further revealed with the X-ray visor, but there are a few that have neither and rely on the player's ability to naturally intuit the rules of the world. There's a great video I saw during my research that focuses solely on this mechanic, so rather than repeat it, I'm going to link that video here, and when you finish my video, you can go check it out. What I will say is that rather than finding one key that fits one door or a single disposable item, this system allows the player to push against the boundaries in place and remember, hey, I just got power bombs. Wasn't there a yellow door here? In this way, weapons pull double duty. They make Samus more powerful, but they also open up new pathways to explore. Detractors of this style often point out that this means in these games a lot of backtracking is necessary. In a day and age where guides online are prevalent and the answer to the puzzle is a few clicks away, it may seem tedious. However, exploring a world like this in the 90s, when this may be the only game you had all summer, this reliance on player memory and backtracking naturally extended the mileage the game had. Not to mention, Super Metroid does this backtracking so well, I would hardly call it tedious. Much of it can be circumvented entirely through the player growing more adept at the platforming. See this door? I can't reach this door without the high jump boots. But is that true? Could I skip one whole trip to Norfair if I could just get up there without them? Super Metroid has locks that can be picked by the player. Let's talk about the map. Essentially divided into 4 main areas and a couple of sub-areas, the map of Super Metroid is connected. Living, breathing place. There are species that inhabit certain areas that are not found anywhere else. Areas transition naturally from one to another. Even if the music was not there to tell you where you are, the detailed backgrounds serve as visual reminders that you are progressing deeper and deeper into this place. The final area, Torian, is actually pretty close to the start, but it's blocked by a large structure displaying each of the main bosses in the game. Once all of them are defeated, the door opens and you can proceed to the end game. But to get to that point, you'll need to explore the map to the fullest. The map felt huge in the 90s, but today it's just about perfect. Just the right size to facilitate the lack of fast travel features. Areas can be entered in multiple ways, which can lead to unique play scenarios on return visits. Meridia in particular loops on itself from 2 starting locations, and seeing all of it will require some of that understanding of how the world works, and powerful observations on the player's part for the first time through. Let's talk about the moments I mentioned earlier. The Chozo statue coming to life and losing its head mid-battle, the Shine Spark run, and the first room you can screw attack through the walls. The Plasma Beam room, where the enemies are so tough, and then you get the upgrade and blast through them like they're made of tissue paper. The animals, teaching you special skills through wordless tutorials. The ghosts on the wrecked ships, and figuring out you can break the tube with the power bombs, are all jaw-dropping moments in the game that masterfully keep the player engaged and wondering what could be lurking around the next corner. But the best example of all Super's moments, in my opinion, are the bosses. The main bosses are iconic. Kraid, the enormous, imposing boss that can only be damaged when he opens his maw. Phantoon is easily in contention for the game's toughest challenge, with his ghostly presence and difficult to avoid attacks. Dragon is an underwater tank unless you're aware of his 2 special weaknesses, and you have the skill to employ them. And of course, Dragon himself, who's essentially a scrap from start to finish. No tricks, just you versus him, and as many missiles as you can put into him as quickly as possible. Then there are the sub-bosses. None of them are quite as memorable as the main bosses except for one. Crocomire fight is the stuff of nightmares and showcases the horror the Super Nintendo could pull off. That said, the gold Torizo catching your super missiles is also pretty iconic. That just leaves Mother Brain. I struggle to call her the real final boss. It's true you can die in this fight, but really she serves as the payoff more than anything else. One final spectacular moment to end the adventure with a bang. Terrifyingly, she looms over Samus, ready to strike the killing blow. But then, the baby. What else can be said about this moment that has not already been said? The sound deserves some special mention. The baby's dying shriek, followed by Samus's barrage of rainbow fury, hits with such an incredible catharsis, in no small part due to the sound design. Then you escape, saving the animals because it is canon, and flee the planet, mission complete. It is perfect, really, without any peer or without any flaw. Okay, that's not technically true. So here it is. The biggest flaw of Super Metroid is that it was the first one. What does that mean? When you're the first, there is no set of instructions on how you should implement things like controls for such an experience. Switching weapons in a game where progression, enemies, and bosses need to be handled uniquely on a room-to-room basis is clunky and frankly outdated. Every Metroidvania game since Super has had better control. I do not mind the floaty jump or the lack of a ledge grab. The game is designed around these physics. But I do struggle holding down and cycling buttons to perform even the most basic of movement and traversals in this game. It is the reason why that this time when I played it, I played a patched version with zero missions style controls. Sometimes I missed the run button, but overall it was a much more manageable and brisk experience. The same hack also improves the upgrade system on the map to match zero missions and includes a completion percentage in the menu. Honestly though, with updated controls, this game is as fresh and compelling as it always has been, and playing it was once again cementing in my mind its place as my favorite Metroid game. I just finished it and I want to play it again. As far as its impact, the game serves as a template on how to build an action-adventure game focused on platforming and player skill-based progression. There's a reason why it's run at AGDQ every year, and people call it the best run consistently from year to year at that event. The game is designed to be perfected, to be played and enjoyed over and over again, to take in those moments and create new moments of your own over and over again. Super Metroid is a true perennial classic. You can play it year after year, day after day, and many people literally do. I know I will return to it again, probably very soon in fact. But until then, if somehow you have never played this game, I cannot recommend it enough. See you next mission. Okay, it's time for a confession. My first real experience with 2D Metroid ever was Fusion. Sometime around 2002, a friend of mine sold me this Game Boy Advance, a little blue one. But being a broke college student, the only game I had for it for a long time was Super Mario Bros. 3. I went to visit my cousins for a week in Louisiana, who lived about 4 hours away, and there it was, sitting on a shelf in the living room. And I asked my cousin, could I play it while I was there? And he said I could keep it. So I slotted it into my crystal blue clear GBA, flipped the switch, and fell in love instantly with Metroidvanias. From the title screen, the presence of this game is brought into full focus. The opening music is terrifying, and as much as people complain about the quality of the GBA's sound chip, this game made full use of the available soundscape to be a genuinely scary experience. Okay, maybe scary or terrifying is inaccurate, but the tension at play is easily mistaken for terror, and Fusion genuinely thrives on the tension it creates. It maintains it throughout the experience over multiple playthroughs. Now, one of the principal complaints leveled against Metroid 4 is its linear nature. The player is not given a lot of freedom for sequence breaking like in Super Metroid, which is often considered a staple of the franchise. but this is limiting for the purpose of ramping up the tension. The narrative of the game limits the player by design. The obvious reason for this decision is to streamline the gameplay for a portable game system. Most people were not going to be able to beat this game in one sitting. The game needed to be designed to empower the player to pick it up and quickly be re-immersed back into the game. Objectives are laid out for you specifically for this reason, but underneath this philosophy of design, these decisions further serve the tension of the story. I said Zero Mission could be defined by the words adventure, and I would say Super Metroid's defining word would be intrigue, but Fusion's focus is this tension, which is why it succeeds at it so effectively. The linearity serves the focus, and to me, turns what others would call a weakness into a strength. The game is rich with detail. On my most recent playthrough, I noticed that every few missile shots Samus's arm cannon would smoke. I've played the game many times and never noticed it before. Nightmares swooping through the background, as many of you know in Sector 5, is a famous example. It sets the stage for similar details present in Samus Returns and Metroid Dread. Samus's suit looks alive, which is especially impressive considering the size of her sprite on the tiny Game Boy Advance screen. The game is zoomed out more than Zero Mission would wind up being, and Samus's jump is sort of in between Zero Mission and Super Metroid's. It's faster than Super, but slower and more floaty than Zero Mission, and to me, it's just right. All the movement and control is streamlined. For example, rather than having Super and regular missiles be separate items, Fusion stacks their effect, allowing for an extra sense of progression, kind of like the arm cannon upgrades. The pacing in general is very well done, with a nice sense of development being integrated into the narrative. Indeed, this is probably the best implementation of Samus loses everything and gets it all back, trope that is bemoaned by some of the detractors of the series. It makes sense in the story, and you have an ever-present reminder of how much Samus has lost in the form of the SAX. Each encounter with the evil doppelganger is a nail-biting thrill, but progressively you become more and more capable of warding off its attacks until you are just barely on par with its abilities for the final showdown. The story in general is filled with some twists and turns, and while there's not anything groundbreaking going on here, there's still plenty of intrigue that once again serves the tension. The SAX in general is a more memorable antagonist than I would say even Dark Samus from the Prime series. And anytime you hear those heavy clunking footsteps nearby in the game, you pause and you take a deep breath. The game has a sense of cinematography to it as well with the visuals. The close-up of the SAX in the opening comes to mind, but even in the gameplay there are little flourishes and touches that build up the experience. Sometimes the camera will not pan at the same speed as Samus's movement in certain rooms. It moves slowly, deliberately, to maximize the effect of what is revealed. Ridley in the Freezer is a great example, but again the game pulls little tricks like this throughout, and it is very effective at building the mystery and intrigue in the player's mind. When the camera slows down, the player sits up for a little bit and pays close attention. For a 2D sprite game, this was another impressive achievement. The game is more difficult than most of the other titles in the series, but not frustratingly so. Bosses are very aggressive and they rush the player, sending out attacks over wide coverage. Or some of the bosses will have specific weak points that require the player to assess risk. Zazabi, the second boss, is an example. As it jumps around the room, it will randomly open its weak spot underneath and descend slowly. The player must run underneath the boss and fire missiles up, but if Zazabi lands on them, they take damage. Each time he loses a segment, he falls faster, and how many shots you can land before you take hits shrinks. A lot of the bosses function in this fashion, though Zazabi is probably the simplest to identify. There is a risk versus reward dynamic made all the more prominent because of the damage enemies can deal. Samus feels fragile in this game, and in my opinion that serves the narrative and theme yet again. I really like the backgrounds and the color palette of this game. I've noticed that it's not everyone's personal taste, but the brighter colors serve the tiny screen of the GBA well. It also makes sense from the narrative standpoint. The game feels very different from Super Metroid tonally, and a lot of this comes down to this decision to differentiate the colors. The environment feels more artificial, which is appropriate as the entire game takes place on a space station. The tiny details of the biomes recreated for the ship's research tell a story in their own way and drive home how dangerous the X-Parasites are. There is not a single environment they cannot invade, and by extension, thrive in. The only thing immune to them is Samus. Monsters like Ceres and the terrible Nightmare all were taken over by them. Even Ridley, who was already dead, is resurrected by them. And of course, the SAX itself shows that this time, Samus herself would also be completely helpless without the new Metroid DNA that she has. My favorite tune in the game is the one that plays anytime there's a mysterious element at play in the environment or story. It perfectly encapsulates the theme of the game while also displaying a curious intrigue. The soundscape in general really shines in spite of the hardware, and the music serves the story perfectly, telling the player how they should feel from moment to moment. My favorite sound effect is the chunky sound of super missiles when they hit things. It really sells how much stronger they are than the regular missiles. You're probably wondering if I have anything negative to say about this game, but honestly, I cannot think of anything. When taken into context of the hardware and even the franchise as a whole, the game feels like a perfect subversion of Super Metroid, and in my opinion, a more than worthy follow-up. The SAX has great presence, and the X-Parasites are a worthy successor to the Metroids as the monster of the series. They call to mind the monster from The Thing, in the same way the Metroids called to mind the aliens from the original film that inspired them. The story is intriguing, and while many people bemoan how often gameplay is interrupted, these interruptions are short and help the player remember after long breaks in play where they were in the narrative and where they need to go. I've heard people say that this aspect affects their ability to replay the game, but of all the games in the franchise, this is the one I think I've replayed the most. That may be changing, honestly, because I've played Dread a whole lot since it came out, but I have been replaying all these games for these reviews. I noticed that Fusion still holds up incredibly well. It is a stellar example of what can be done in spite of limitations of hardware and screen size, as neither of those things feel like they're at play at all in this case. The game is truly underrated and probably the GBA game I have played the most over the last several years.